Hello everyone and welcome to the third instalment of making my 1860s ball gown inspired by Megs from Little Women. This video will be on the bodice and the Bertha, so I shall jump straight in. You will see that I draped the pattern for my Bertha in part 1, however later on in the process of making this I changed the shape of it to be a bit more narrow, so do keep that in mind when watching this. Here I am cutting interfacing for all of my pieces. Once the interfacing was ironed on, I sewed the side seams together and pressed them flat. The seams have to be very flat and small so that there isn't any bulk in the Bertha. Then I sewed my front and back pieces together and had to struggle to flip it inside out. I'm sure there is an easier way to this that I haven't figured out yet, so if you do know a much simpler way, please let me know, because this took a while and was a hassle. I left 2 small openings at the back of the Bertha so that I could flip it inside out, but these were later pressed and sewn shut. Then I went and pressed the Bertha with a lot of steam to make sure that it was really flat and really clean and sharp looking, as I wanted a very square neckline. Berthas do change in shape a lot, but as I said, I think in part 1 I did want it to be quite square, which isn't a perfect replication of the one in the movie, but it's my one. And here it is at the end. As I said, I do narrow it a bit more later on in the process. Then I went and started draping a bunch of accessories and trims on top of it. Okay, so this is my Bertha so far, and I decided to kind of wing the trims on it as long as I just kept it sort of looking the same, but I wanted some improvisation room for a little design freedom, which I always like to add into my costumes, but I'm not really loving the shape of it too much. I think it's a little bit too thick. I want to add this sort of along here too, and then I have a sheer ribbon that will either go in here or sort of down the middle, and then I have some pearl trim. So I'm not loving it, but that's okay. Sometimes that happens. It'll probably turn out fine and look nice, but yeah. I'll see how it goes. I mean, I've only just kind of started on it. So we will be abandoning the Bertha for just a moment while I talk about the construction of the bodice. For the bodice, I will be creating a basic bodice block and adapting it. My bodice will have a underbust waist dart, and these are the measurements that I used to create my basic bodice block. Here is an example of an 1890s bodice that I patterned previously. And here are some notes on pattern cutting terminology, so you can understand what I'm saying if you are quite new to patterning. I am using a previous body block pattern that I made as a template to trace around and create my new pattern. Here I am transferring the darts on the original pattern to my new one using the pinprick method, which is where you puncture holes along the lines and then go over it with a pencil, and it should transfer the markings onto the paper behind. This shoulder dart will be closed later on. All basic bodice blocks are made with this shoulder dart, so keep that in mind. Then I went a couple of centimeters below my original shoulder dart and drawing a line down from this to the bottom of the pattern, and this will create my waist dart. I'm also adding in some waist suppression, which I think was 1.5 centimeters on this waist dart. Then I am going in and refining some of my lines, such as the armhole. Now for a Victorian bodice, the shoulder seam is slightly sloped and is dropped back a bit behind your shoulder. Then I cut my piece out. I am cutting down the centre of my waist dart to free up any tension in the paper. Then I am folding the original shoulder dart in on itself and taping this closed with masking tape. Then I am giving my bodice a square neckline, which isn't totally perfect here because I will be altering it a bit more during a fitting on myself, but I'm just opening it a bit more so that I can cut less fabric out. Then I am roughly drawing out my side front panel, which is positioned on the armhole and is a curved seam. During fitting I will probably move this closer to the waist dart, but this is to just give me a vague idea of the shape. Then I am drawing in my grain line, and I actually make a small mistake here. I want my bodice to be cut on the fold, not on the straight grain, so please ignore that. I did fix it after this. But my side front will be cut on the straight grain. Then I am adapting my back piece and adding in a curved seam here. I noticed on Meg's bodice that her centre back is quite narrow and skinny, and the curve takes up most of her back. So I'm trying my best to replicate that. Now, many adjustments can be made during fittings, as I said earlier, but I am just giving myself a vague idea of what I want my pattern and my bodice to look like. And these pieces will both be cut on the straight grain. Then I'm curving the back neckline just a little bit. It will be probably squared off as the front was, because my bertha is a square shape, as you've already seen. But like I said again, this will be adapted during fittings. Then I cut these pieces out. Now I must remind you all to cut off the waist suppression that you've made onto your patterns. Even though I've made patterns and bodices many times, sometimes you just make these little mistakes, but they can be taken and altered later on. Now here I am adding a seam allowance around my piece and cutting it out of the calico. Then I am tacking in balance marks to make sure that the bodice pieces match up. I would recommend that you add balance marks to your patterns, because otherwise I would get very confused as to what goes where and what needs to be sewn where. And it is really useful to tack in your lines. Then I tried the bodice on once it had been sewn and made some alterations. As you can see, some areas were taken in more than others, mainly around the waist, and that is because I left the waist suppression on, so I knew this would happen already. And here it is on the mannequin, and here is the back. So I just an update on the bertha since we last saw it. So I wasn't enjoying it, obviously, as you saw, but now I have narrowed it down, thinned it out so it's not as wide and chunky here, and I've just neatened it up a little bit. I really wasn't happy with how I looked at the start. Sometimes that happens and that's okay. You have to take some turns and twists in the directions to get where you want to get, obviously, but I'm liking how it looks now. The only thing I'm not too fussed on is these stitch lines here. I think I should have been a bit more careful instead of rushing into it and just taken my time to hand sew some things. I'm okay with this one up here. I think that looks too bad, but if I can, I'll find some very miniature lace trim in pink, or if not, I'll dye it pink and maybe sew it around there if I can find one. For now, I think it's okay. And I've also fitted the bodice to myself, and the shape is really nice. Yeah, I'm liking it. Now I just have to cut it all out in the taffeta and we'll get somewhere. Hello everybody, so a little update since we last spoke. I've taken a bit of time out from making this. I had to finish some things for university, which of course I do a sewing degree, so it was all sewing based, and just a few live things. I took a break from everything and made a couple of other videos that were just a bit of fun, but now I'm back, obviously with this part 3. I am back to working on this bodice. That is just a little update on why this upload has taken a lot longer than expected, at least a month behind schedule, but that's okay. It's my dress. I've not got any events to go to, so yeah, but that's where I've been. So in terms of sewing this bodice, I had to take in 3 centimeters on all of the seams around the waist area. So that's what happened during fittings, which is fine. I've now added that alteration note to my main bodice pieces, and now I'm going to sew those together. Here you will see that I machine basted the lines on my bodice before sewing the seams together. Okay, so the main bodice and the lining is assembled, and I will say about this fabric, as you can see, it looks a bit ugly. It creases so easily, and I don't have a pressing ham or a tailor's ham to do these curved areas very well. So yeah, once it's on and it's all together, I'm hoping that it won't look so creased. But now this is sewn together, I still have to sew the shoulders here. After this I will be sewing this to the lining by repeating what I always do, which I just realised I can't say that because you guys don't know what I do. Basically I will have this lining here and the main bodice obviously, and sew along this top line and then flip this over that line, and this is on the inside, so the raw edges underneath meet the raw edges under here, and then I press it well. The armholes will then be bound off, the back will be probably bagged out. Just before I sew the main bodice to the lining, I am adding boning channels with this lovely colour of disgusting gold brown bias binding, and this is how I make my boning channels. I use strong bias binding, and I thought I had some white left over, but I actually didn't, so I am left with this, but it's okay, it's all going to be hidden. But yeah, it's just a bit ugly, isn't it? But I cut strips of it, making sure that my boning will fit in here, and I am going to sew around these edges a couple of times and then insert the boning. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so I apologise if I'm not filming bit by bit, but it is very warm today, and I sort of planned today to just see if I could get back into working on this, and filming things often makes the process a lot more difficult and it just takes more time, so I'm just churning in bit by bit here and there. I'm trying to explain it as well as I can without fully showing you how it's done on camera. I hope that's okay. If you would like to see tutorials on anything that I've mentioned that I haven't showed, please let me know. But I have sewn my stitch line across the top here and down the centre back. And this will then be turned over, and this lovely, well, rather ugly lining will be hidden, and all of this will be on the inside. So I'm going to flip this inside out and press it really well and come back to you guys. The bodice has been turned right side out now, and these edges here have been pressed flat, and I'm really happy with it. I have to now bind off these armholes, which is done by taking some bias binding, sewing it around this armhole here, flipping it under and slip stitching it onto the calico lining fabric. Here is the bias binding I just made out of this fabric. And also, sorry for the lighting, it's now night time and I want to crack on instead of leaving it until the morning, and I really have nowhere to be right now, so I thought why the hell not just finish the bodice tonight. And I have now bound off this armhole. I just need to slip stitch this down, but I actually think I'm going to leave it till the morning, then I can wake up feeling awake and refreshed and finish this armhole off. Now it is time to add the back closure, and I am using hooks and eyes, and for a bodice the right will always go over the left. These little hooks here will be on the right side and the round ones will be on the left. And I have double threaded my needle with 2 strands of thread, and I'm going to possibly buttonhole stitch around these here. Here I am adding some plastic boning into the centre back seam. I only did this on one side just to give it more strength. Ideally I would recommend you do it on both sides. And here is the mostly finished bodice with the back closure. And with that, I think this bodice is finished. Now after this, I will be tackling the skirt and assembling the skirt onto the bodice. This video will either include the ending with the skirt hemming, or I will end it here. If it's the case that I'm ending it here, thank you all very much for watching and being patient with this part 3, because it's taken a long time to get out, and obviously the bodice is the most complex part to make of a dress, so I hope the wait was somewhat worth it and you've learned at least one thing along the way. I will say that these raw edges here, I think I'll be adding a small lace trim to, but it will not be on the finished product when you see it with videos, because I will have to wait a week or so for those to come back, and I will be finishing the skirt tomorrow. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in part 4, which is the final reveal and the ending of this costume.